Billy Paul Hanson and Annie Ruth Hanson. And I just wanted to ask you, how did y'all come to be associated with First United Methodist Church in Pittsburgh?
Let me tell mine. My father was a Baptist and my mother was a Methodist. And Mama was the one that brought us to Sunday school and church. Is the reason that I'm a Methodist.
Uh-huh.
Because my father was what he called what did they call him? Anyway, firm Baptist. But he never did take us to church like my mother, and that's the reason.
Okay. Did your mother grow up in First Methodist too?
She grew up in the First Methodist.
Okay. And what was her name?
Mary Eugenia Reardon.
Okay.
And my father was Oscar L. Hanson.
Okay. And how about your family, Annie Ruth? How did your family come to First United Methodist Church?
My daddy and my mother were a member of the First Church. And I had a sister 2 months old, and we were having a revival, and Mama didn't stay home with the baby. Daddy and I went to church by ourselves. And after church was over that Sunday, our Bible says April the 13th. '23.
Uh-huh.
But the church says that I was became a member on April the 18th, 1923. Well, we were having a revival and we had gone outside. Church was over. Morning service, Sunday morning service. And I said, Daddy, could we go back in the church and let me join the church? And he says, well, you can do that tonight. I said, we might not get to come tonight. So we went back in the church. And my Aunt Ruby Sewell and Miss Susie Quinn were standing there talking to the preacher. And I told him what I wanted to do. And he said, good, we've got 2 witnesses here, we'll just do it right now. So that may be the reason that the church has the 18th.
Uh-huh.
And my Bible has the 17th because whoever took the records for that Sunday morning, there might not be anybody joined Sunday night, and then we'd have done that. And then the preacher probably told about me joining. That may be the reason the church has the 18th instead of the 17th.
Right. How old were you then?
4.
4? And you still remember it clearly?
Oh, of course I do.
Do you remember who was preaching the revival? Or who the pastor was?
I don't remember who was doing the revival unless our preacher was doing it.
Okay.
With Brother Cross.
Yeah, either Cross or Campbell. I mean, look and see for sure about that.
How old were y'all when y'all started going to Sunday school there?
I went to Sunday school there all my life.
Well, I never did go a lot. Because after I grew up and went in the service, and I spent 5 years in California, but I do remember that I joined me and my brother Robert. They were having a revival over at Shepherd, which is used to be a small Baptist church out there. And Robert and I joined the church that night, and Mama brought my letter down the next week and put it in. But actually I joined at a revival.
Okay. What were the worship services like in those days compared to how they are now?
Well, I remember that at revivals and things, the women, if you was a kid and didn't belong with them, a bunch of women would get around you and talk you in to joining.
Mm-hmm. How about Sunday school? What was Sunday school like when you were growing up in the church?
No difference from what it is now.
Where did your class meet?
Our class started upstairs, and when we were in the primary department, and when we were promoted downstairs, we had that room when you go into the from the front door and go into the fellowship hall. It's just a pass through.
Okay.
Class, that's what our class had. And then we gave that up for a larger class and moved over almost on the west side of that building. And stayed there for a while.
Uh-huh.
Well, when I started out, I went to the men's class, the one that I'm going to now, Good Citizens. And we met in bottom of the church there, the basement. And there was 50 men in our class. And then when we built the fellowship hall, we moved over there, and it was in there until we moved it a couple of years ago.
Okay.
We were both members of the same church for 11 years before we met.
Okay. How did y'all come to meet?
I always wanted a big brother. My big brother was born dead. And the fellow that lived across the street over here said, I told him, I said, I sure wish I had a big brother like you. He said, I'll be your big brother. Anytime you want to do anything, you let me know. So we did that. And one night he called and he said, you have any plans tonight? I said, no. I'll be there in a few minutes. Let's go to the fair. I said, okay. And that's the night that I met Billy Paul. And I was sitting in Norvell's car, and Billy Paul and a friend of his, and a friend of mine, and her friend were walking along there and saw me sitting in that car. So she came up here and he said, come go with us. I said, okay, let me go tell Norvell. So I went to tell Norvell that I was going with them. That was our first date.
And that was at the fair?
That was at the fair.
Where was the fair?
It's the Northeast Texas Fair. I don't know whether you've been told this or not, but at one time, Pittsburgh had the second largest fair in the state of Texas.
Never heard that.
And the reason for that was the state fairs for Texas and Louisiana. The Texas fair was held in Dallas for 2 weeks, and then they'd take 2 weeks off and they would go to Shreveport, the carnivals and all that stuff. And Pittsburgh is about halfway in between, so they picked Pittsburgh to stop and rest for that 2 weeks, and so they just had the big Northeast Texas Fairgrounds over there, and they started. We would have all the carnivals and things that they had at the state fair.
And Mount
For that
Pleasant
reason.
Mount Pleasant just couldn't understand how in the world we could have a big fair and they couldn't do it.
So there was rivalry between the two communities?
Yeah, they wanted though. But then the train was traveling on the east and west line, and so they didn't go through Mount Pleasant. They come through Pittsburgh. And that's the reason that we had the second largest in They tried to get it back when the war was over. It stopped. It stopped during the Depression in the 30s and 40s. And then they tried to revive it after the war was over, but they had it a couple of years, but it didn't pan out like it was before.
So what year did y'all meet? Approximately.
October the 31st, 1936. I was 17 and he was 19.
Okay. Who are...
We went together off and on for almost 24 years. 23 years and 8 months before we married.
Y'all must have been pretty patient.
No, each of us was going with different people, and I was engaged at one time during that time, 23 years.
So how long have y'all been married now?
We married July the 4th.
45 years.
Be 45 years, July the 4th.
Who are some of the important leaders in the church that you remember throughout the years?
I think I remember Mr. Couch. He was a very devoted man, a good man. He and what was Miss Nina's husband's name?
Floyd Berry.
Floyd Berry. I remember him real well.
Is he any relation to Lawrence Berry?
He was Lawrence's uncle.
Okay. And what was Mr. Couch's first name?
Berna, B-E-R-N-A. Berna, I believe Berna C. Same as.
He had a son named Verna Claude,
Okay.
about our age.
And then Fred Coben, he's another one. He was the school superintendent,
Mm-hmm.
and he was real active in the church.
Miss Belle A. Taylor was my Sunday school class teacher, and she lived across the street from the church, and she had what we call a 5 and 10 cent store downtown.
And Lacey Davis, I remember him. He's been very active in the
Uh-huh.
Methodist Church all along.
Lacey joined on the 15th of April, and I joined on the 17th. That's when the church has the 18th on it. And Ruby Garrett joined on the 22nd.
Uh-huh.
All three of us joined during the revival.
Must have been a powerful revival. Who are some of the pastors that you remember in your years of attendance?
A.W. Gordon, I just can't remember. I don't know that was going to be one of the questions. I've got it in the book, so I know exactly who was here what years.
Mm-hmm. What if you have had an opportunity to speak to the coming generations? What words of wisdom would you share with the future people in our church?
Attend church regularly.
And that everything's not always going as it should in churches as well as other activities.
Mm-hmm.
You have to make adjustments for changes.
What are the biggest changes that you've seen over the years at the church?
Oh, our program is more or less what it's always been about Sunday school and when we have the services, and what time we have them.
Had one morning service and one evening service.
But it hadn't been but, what, 8 or 10 years since we started having that early morning service.
We had very active Epworth League.
Mm-hmm. And what is Epworth League?
That's an evening service before
Same as the
evening
youth.
church. It's a youth activity.
Same as the youth. Methodist youth now, they call it the Epworth League. And I don't know that much about it, but I think that Epworth was some official or something in the church was what it was. I mean, he was a leader of youth or something.
Epworth was the church where John Wesley's father was pastor in England.
Is that it?
That's right.
So Annie Ruth, did you grow up going to Epworth League?
Yeah.
What kind of activities did you do there?
We had a regular program every Sunday night. And that was the main thing we had. Sometimes it was only youth that carried on. And at one time, the expression teacher came here, and she met with us. She was single. And sometimes we had a sponsor, and most time we didn't. The youth just did it themselves. We did everything. If we had a party or anything, we furnished the refreshments. Adults didn't do anything for us.
You asked about the preachers. I remember most Milton Jordan. Did you ever know him?
I know his son, but I didn't know him.
Preacher. Yeah. And he was one of the, I think, one of the best ones we ever had.
He was one who came early, and then he came back again. I believe that last time he served 6 years, maybe that last time.
Well, then he also preached over, I believe, 4 years at Mount Pleasant. We were at not general conference, but at conference, and we had Brother Jordan twice before, and we had talked to Billy Means, and they were down there from Mount Pleasant, and they said they hadn't assigned them back then. They didn't tell you beforehand who you had assigned, and they was looking for somebody. And so I talked to Milton Jordan and told him I knew he was looking for a church. I said, Mount Pleasant's looking for a preacher. You might go talk to Billy. And he went and talked to them, and they wound up with him.
Billy was president of one of the banks over there.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else y'all would like to share with posterity?
Well, we tried to go every time the door opened. And I guess that's one reason we've been so interested in it. Doing that. And when we had a date on Sunday night, didn't say what we're going to do. We always knew we were going to church. And that's kind of unusual for young people. But both of us were members of that church 11 years before we met, because Bill Paul went to Leesburg School and I went to Pittsburgh School.
Mm-hmm. How many people were in attendance back then? Do you remember?
I don't have any.
Oh, I imagine it. What do we have now, 400 and something?
We have over 400 members. Our average attendance is just under 200.
Yeah.
Was the sanctuary pretty full on a Sunday morning?
Well, I can't remember when the sanctuary would be, for years and years, when the sanctuary would be just about full. And they had that big petition that they have it closed now where they have built it.
Right.
But they had that was a big room back there. There was nothing in it. And it was in the 50s, wasn't it? They cut it up into rooms and put a restroom in there.
Mm-hmm.
And the church, the Sunday school was built for, what is now just south of the auditorium. That was the Sunday school room at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was
The
just,
petition usually was down.
they could let the petition down or raise it when they had overflow crowd.
And I remember lots of times
That's
when
what
they
the
raised it,
petition was for.
especially when we had revivals, we always had to raise it.
Mm-hmm.
But we've both been members of the church. See, I joined April, like I said a while ago, April of 23, and he joined November the 8th of 25. But then we didn't meet until 36.
Well, thanks for being willing to share.
Wish we could remember more, but